Hey, what's up, y'all? This is William, the Permaculture Consultant, and today we are going to be doing a massive permaculture Q&A. I've been on the road a lot lately, been through some, if you just want an update on what's been going on in my life, watch the last 75 hard update, and you might understand why I haven't been, answering comments or emails lately. I promise you I'll be getting to them here pretty soon. So yeah. Today is going to be a massive permaculture Q&A. I'm probably going to be answering more questions in this video than I ever have in previous permaculture Q&A questions or videos. So let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get started. Also, if you have a permaculture Q&A that you want answered, leave it down below in the comment section with the hashtag permaculture Q&A at the beginning of it. And if you need a consultation, hit up the email down below. Also, before I forget, I'm going to be at the Back to the Land Festival in October and also the Kentucky Sustainable Living Festival in October. Kentucky Sustainable Living is going to be having a charity dinner for Caleb House. Caleb House is basically where they go and Bear Independent and his team, they go save kids from child trafficking. Like, it's the most important issue that's going on in the world right now. And they're going to have a charity dinner for that specifically. So can't wait to see you guys there. Let's get started with the video. This one is from Eagle, I believe. Interesting name. I did just see a bald eagle the other day, which is pretty cool. But your name is Eagle. I'd like to treat my cattle pasture with compost extract to improve the soil. I'm in Central California where our grass dries out and we don't get rain for 6 months of the year. I think it wouldn't make sense to spread compost extract on a dry pasture where no rain is expected for months. Wouldn't all the microbes just die? But it might make sense to spread compost extract on a dry pasture late in the dry season where the first rains are expected soon, or maybe there's another strategy that would improve the pasture soil. I'd appreciate hearing your comments. Thanks. So you are absolutely right in your thinking. Applying compost extract on soil that isn't expected to get much moisture in the foreseeable future, your microbes are largely just going to die. Now, a step that I would add is maybe renting or buying a yeoman's plow. If you have a tractor, I would rent or buy a yeoman's plow, and I would do some keyline trenches down your pasture. Keyline, it can be simplified to basically this. You're doing 8 to 16 foot spacing on your yeoman's plow, and you're going to go up or downhill at a 2% grade towards your ridge line. Doing the yeoman's plow is going to break up the compaction in your pasture, and it's one of the only ways to till without creating more compaction below the till line. Like when a lot of people till, let's say you till 6 inches deep, that 7th inch is going to have a super hard compaction layer, and that's what you want to avoid. But what you could do in the dry season right now is go ahead and do your keyline trenches. It's basically called subsoiling. You're going to do the subsoiling down your pasture, downhill at a 2% grade towards your ridge line, and then right before your rain event, go ahead and apply the soil microbes. And what that's going to do, instead of building soil up like we typically do in the gardens or grazing and stuff like that, you're going to be building soil down as well. There's no lower limit to beneficial soil. The only limit is your first compaction layer. That's where you're kind of limited on how much soil depth you can get. But if you can get that yeoman plow, break through that first compaction layer, and then apply your compost extracts, you're going to have, it's going to be highly beneficial to your pasture, especially if you do it preferably after your first rain event, like the compost extract application. Preferably after your first rain event, make sure that there is actually some moisture in the ground, and then go ahead and apply your extract right before your next rain event. And that's going to be the best, that's going to be one of the best ways to go as far as that goes. But yeah, your thinking was completely right. If you do it on dry pasture, if you apply your compost teas and your compost extracts on dry ground or whenever you're going through your drought period, then it's going to, a lot of them are going to die in that period. But if you can do about 3 applications of that compost extract, then you can almost guarantee that you have a very, very high success rate, especially by that 3rd one. So if you view it like your first wave of attack, a lot of them are going to die. Your second wave of attack, you're making some progress, and then your 3rd wave of attack, you've completely conquered. So think of it that way, and you should have some awesome pasture by this time, or by next spring. So hopefully that helps. This next one is from Crooked Pines. I have 2 questions if you have the time. I do. First, my coworker is willing to give me his grass clippings so I can get my compost going, but he has a major issue with ground pearls. From what I've read, they eat the roots and not the actual grass. Do you think that would be an issue using that in my compost? We have Bermuda grass in our yard and pastures, so I do not want them infesting our property. Second, I am creating a silvopasture and curious on what height to cut down the trees. Do I leave a stump or cut even with the ground? In my mind, I see my cattle stepping on them and breaking a leg if they are cut even with the ground. Thanks and love the content. Thank you. If you do a hot composting method, all of your pests, your pathogens, your weed seeds, all of that stuff is going to be eliminated. So as long as you stick to a hot composting method, you should be perfectly fine with using the ground pearls. Now your second question is, let's see if I can get an example of it, but your second question is talking about what height do you cut the silvopasture trees at? And if you have cows, they might not necessarily break a leg if you're even with the pasture, but you might as well utilize, here's a good example. You might as well, this is a pin oak right here, and this is one, underneath this is the stump. Like you can see right there. Oop, hold on. There we go. You can see the stump right there, and then you can see all this new growth coming out from where I cut. So one of the benefits of turning your pasture into silvopasture is that you also get a very nutrient dense fodder right afterwards. Now I could take that clump right there and I could clip it and then I could hang it, and let it dry and then feed it through the winter if I wanted to. That's called tree hay, and oaks are really good for that because they're super high in tannins and keep the animals parasite free. Or you could leave it in place and let your animals graze it themselves once they get by. Now that one is about 2 feet from the ground, but you could do, like if you're doing cows, you could do 2 to 3 feet from the ground. So that way you can always see it. You're not gonna accidentally run over it if you're, using a vehicle through there. Also, there's no chance of your cows breaking a leg or anything like that on there. So that's typically the height that I cut it at, is about 2 to 3 feet. You could even go higher if you wanted to create more of a umbrella effect. That's called pollarding. You could coppice, which is about ground level, or you could pollard, which is about a little bit above head height, and that creates like an umbrella effect and creates shade for you. So, but if you do it about head height, then your animals aren't going to necessarily have access to freely graze that area themselves. It's going to be one of those scenarios where you have to go cut and introduce it to your animals. But if you do it about 3 to 4 feet, they should be good. So hopefully that helps. This one is from Heather Naturally. Permaculture Q&A. I have a stickweed Verbicina occidentalis infestation. How do I get rid of it before it totally consumes my pasture? Only rabbits will eat it, and I don't have 400 rabbits and tractors to eat it down. This is going to be one of those cases where timing and attrition is going to be a major factor here. So it is a perennial variety. There's a couple of things you could do, and if you employed all of it, then you're almost guaranteed to get rid of it. But so I believe it's like late summer, early fall, it starts dropping seed heads. If you can get it cut down and let it decompose on the ground before it starts dropping seed heads, that's gonna help quite a bit in the following year, making sure it doesn't grow or get out of hand anymore. Another thing you could do is early spring, go ahead and graze heavily. If you have the option to graze heavily or mow, and then get something seeded before you get your spring rains and stuff like that. You could get something preferential to you to seed. It could be like a standard cover crop, it could be a grass species, anything like that. But something that's going to grow faster than the stickweed and something that's going to outcompete the stickweed. So remember, it's a battle for sunlight, not a battle for nutrients. So if you can get something that's going to outshade that stickweed and grow faster than the stickweed, then you have a high chance that it'll go down year after year after year. Now, it's not going to be one of those things where this is where the attrition part comes in. It's not going to be one of those things where you cut down once and you seed over the top and then it's gone forever. You might have to do a couple applications of that a couple years, down the line. Like it might not, like you might make a little bit of progress this first year and then even more progress the next year and then even more progress the next year after that until it's finally gone and you have your preferred species out in your pastures. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a good starting place. If you need more information, then just email me at ThePermacultureConsultant@gmail.com. This one is from Richard Sims 7840. What's that symbol on the hat mean, bro? Love what you do, by the way. This symbol is, with the bison on it, is the Real American Freedom Party hat. And it's exactly what it says. It's a Real American Freedom Party, not this fake freedom that the Republicans want to push or this fake freedom that the Democrats actually want to push. It's the real American freedom. That means that you shouldn't have politicians that have dual citizenships. Doesn't that seem odd? Does it seem like those politicians would be acting in the best interest of America if they also have a dual citizenship with some other party? Seems a little odd to me, but that's just one facet of it. It's the real American Freedom Party, and also it's created by a man named Andy Frisella. A lot of you have seen me do the 75 Hard updates and stuff like that. He's the one that created the 75 Hard. He also has a podcast called Real AF. It's an entrepreneur and business podcast, basically, and he's been in the business. He's been in entrepreneurship for about 25 years, and you get on there, you can send him questions if you want to. One of the inspirations for this permaculture Q&A, and he just imparts whatever wisdom he has on the topic to the listeners. So yeah, check it out. I wouldn't necessarily play it around kids unless you're fine with that, which is perfectly fine. Just because somebody cusses doesn't mean what they say isn't true. So yeah, I would check him out. Andy Frisella, Real AF podcast. I listen to every single one of the episodes that come out, and it's an absolutely wonderful podcast. This is from user KV2PT4LU9Y. That's another computer-generated one. Have you ever planted pumpkin seeds in cardboard ice cream or similar tubes as a season extender? Just plant the biodegradable container without disturbing the roots. I guess the closest thing I've ever done to something like that was maybe starting seedlings in like an egg carton, like a cardboard egg carton, and then planting that egg portion of the cardboard into the soil. But other than that, no, I haven't done like a ice cream container pumpkin or anything like that. And I didn't really view it as like a season extender, and I'm not entirely sure how that would work as a season extender, unless maybe you're putting it over the top of the plant as it's growing during your frost dates and stuff, or during your like early frost or your late frost or something like that. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'll have to check it out. Thank you so much. This is from Grandmom Zoo. Fire ants. Been chasing them with DE, I'm assuming you mean diatomaceous earth. Any ideas for removing these demons from hell that works better than diatomaceous earth because of poison which I will not use? Thanks. Oh, besides a poison which I will not use. That makes more sense. So I've answered this a few times before in previous permaculture Q&A questions, but I have no problem at all. Like, that's another thing, is that I have no problem at all re-answering some of the questions, because sometimes the information changes, or I discover more, or I find better alternatives or methods that actually a lot of you guys let me know about. So one of the things that seems to get brought up a lot in the comment section is orange oil, using like orange oil, pouring that into the not fireworks nest, but the fire ants nest, and usually they seem to go away after that. Another thing that I've noticed is, depending on the location, let's say it's in your garden that you're talking about, changing the soil biology seems to really get rid of the fire ants. One thing that I've noticed in my garden actually is that since putting down a cover crop and increasing the bacteria to fungi ratio in my garden, I've noticed that a lot of the previous fire ants, like hills and stuff like that, have been replaced with worms. So I have a personal theory that you either have fire ants or you have worms, and not necessarily just fire ants, but ants in general. And they both serve a very, very similar function. They both create aggregates in the soil, and what they leave back, their castings, are highly beneficial to the soil. So if it's in your garden, then I would recommend putting down a cover crop and start making really, really awesome compost and getting that applied, and that'll help invite the worms and get rid of the fire ants. Alternatively, you could pour orange oil, and another thing I heard was orange oil plus dish soap. So hopefully that helps. Thank you so much. This one is from Engineer Meg. Thanks for all the information, William. We learned a bunch and appreciate your sense of humor. Any updates on the soil test lab? This customer is ready when you are. The soil test lab is about this close to being completed. I just need a few more things, and then we're going to be off to the races, and I'll be accepting soil samples from everybody who wants a soil lab or a soil test done. And now some of you might be wondering, like, okay, I can just get a soil test, you know, at Walmart or something like that, or my local, you know, gardening store and get a soil test. This is completely different. This is a soil biological test. This is something that you need a compounding shadowing microscope for, and you also need to learn how to recognize some of these organisms. I learned all this from the Soil Food Web School from Dr. Elaine Ingham. That's where I learned how to use the microscope and how to identify these organisms and what's good and what's bad and all that type of stuff. So yeah, the soil lab is just like this close to being ready. In fact, Emily is at the house right now researching what computer I need specifically. Emily's my wife, by the way. She's researching which computer I need specifically in order to run this the camera for the microscope. There's a version that works for Mac, which is what I use to edit videos and all that stuff. There's a version that works for it, but it's very limited on what you can and can't do with it. So I'm gonna have to switch platforms and get a PC. And I'm trying to, yeah, I'm not good with computers, y'all. I didn't know how to use really a computer until me and my parents started Permapassure's Farm, their YouTube channel. That's whenever I started learning how to use a computer. This close, this close. Be patient with me, y'all. This one is from Northside Dork. What are your thoughts on planting fruit trees closely together? I have 2 young peach trees that are spaced 12 feet apart, trunk to trunk. I was thinking about planting a dwarf cherry tree in between the 2 peach trees. The trees will be planted in a row, and I plan on pruning my trees to make something similar to a hedgerow. If this is a bad idea, then how far would I have to offset the cherry tree to make this work? Dude, I think you have a better understanding of how trees actually grow than most orchardists and even most permaculture designers. That is exactly mimicking nature. You've got this. You're absolutely right. If you have 12-foot spacing between your trees, so there's 7 layers to a forest. There's the overstory, there's the understory, there's the bush and shrub layer, there's the herbaceous layer, there's the vine layer, there's the ground cover layer, and there's also the mycelial layer, but in this scenario, we're not counting that. And you have all those different layers as opportunity to grow more food. So you have your 2 peach trees, those will count. They're semi-dwarf, I believe you said, or maybe just full-size peach trees, but those are gonna count in your scenario as the overstory. So what you could do is include the understory and make that your next productive layer, basically. So yeah, you're right on the spot. And if you look at nature, if you look at these trees, minus the ones I've cleared for more spacing for grass to grow, if you look at these trees, or if you look into a forest and stuff like that, trees are not spaced the same way those plant labels or those tree tags will tell you that they're spaced. They're spaced much, much closer. And if you can get those roots to interact with each other, then they're only going to benefit each other. This is not a battle for nutrients, it's a battle for sunlight. So as long as you can make sure everything that you want productive that needs sunlight can get the sunlight via pruning, then you're good to go. The tree will still grow even if it doesn't have enough sunlight to produce cherries. So if you notice that, like, okay, past couple years on these cherries, haven't really gotten much production, maybe increase the sunlight to those cherries and then you should be good to go. And one other thing to keep in mind is make sure that your branches aren't rubbing together. Like, make sure the peach branches and the cherry branches aren't rubbing together, otherwise those create potential infection sites. So keep that in mind. But other than that, dude, you got it. That's exactly how a forest grows. So hopefully that's helpful. This is a bit of a two-parter. Brian Chrisman says, fall broiler processing is around the corner. Most of the scraps go to the pigs, but can I compost the things I can't feed to the pigs? Specifically gallbladder and bile. And then William Zegley comments, yuppers in the compost so long as you use the hot method. If it lived once, it can live again through composting. And there you go. That's the answer right there. As long as you use a hot composting method, you can throw really anything that's like exactly like William Zegley just said. If it's lived once, it can live again, to the point where when I was at Jeff Lawton's at Zaytuna Farm, we were putting small amounts of crude oil in the compost just to prove a point. It does add like a nice gel effect to your compost, which is really hard to find in nature. But yeah, if it's lived once, it can live again, just understanding what materials you're working with. So the gallbladder and the bile from your chickens, those are going to be super high in nitrogen, like super high in nitrogen. So if you're putting it to your compost pile, make sure the ratio between that super high nitrogen and your carbon isn't like 50-50. Depending on the season in which you're composting, if you want to get real technical about it, it might be 10 to 30% of your compost volume. So just keep that in mind. Anytime you add high nitrogen, you're also going to need to add a carbon and a lower nitrogen form as well. So yeah, and in fact, the best compost that I make is whenever I have animal parts or animal entrails or organs and stuff like that added to the compost. That is by far the best compost I make, is whenever animal products are included in it as well. So hopefully that helps, and hopefully that answers your question. This one is from Austin Trees. Hello, William. I'm in Zone 6A. If I'm surrounded by thick wooded areas from the direction we get wind and storms from, is that enough to be a microclimate in 6B or 7A? What effect would a decent sized pond do if I added one? Okay, so in your scenario, it's a kind of a different microclimate. It means like, so you basically have a wind block is what you're describing. If you have trees in the way of the provincial wind and also the like storm direction, then you have more of a wind block. And in that scenario, I wouldn't necessarily say that it gives you access to a different climate of production, but what it does give you is the opportunity to plant things that don't like wind. Like in your example, cold hardy kiwis would be an example of what you could plant there. Cold hardy kiwis do not like heavy winds. In fact, they don't like wind much at all. As long as your pond has access to the sun during the winter, then it's going to act as like a heat sink, and it's going to stabilize the temperatures around that pond. And it's also going to it's going to stabilize the temperatures around that pond and give a microclimate immediately around that pond. Specifically, if you're in the northern hemisphere, it's going to be warmer on the north side of that pond in the winter than other areas of your property. So keep that in mind. It's pretty important that the pond has access to sunlight. So yeah, it would be highly beneficial to your property in general, but in addition to the trees, just make sure the trees aren't outshading the pond and making sure that this pond has access to sunlight so it can absorb that heat, absorb that temperature, and kind of slowly release it through the night. Got one from JBFO7WG. Hi, William. It has been a joy watching you branch out from your mom and pop, and absolutely love your channel. Great work. Thank you so much. Couple questions. What are your thoughts about bees under home power electric wires? On our Southwest Oregon farmstead, we have half an acre multi-species varietal stone fruit orchard and use 5-foot plastic tree tubes to protect them from deer and small varmint. Growth seems slower than what I anticipated over the 3.5 years since bare root planted with cardboard and continuous heavy wood chip mulching. Thoughts or ideas? I have a friend gave us a lot of old worm leachate in plastic containers, supposedly vented for air. From last year, some mold seemed to be growing in some of the containers. Is this stuff still alive at all? Any benefit to still using it, or will it be introducing bacteria that we don't want to our gardens and orchard? Lastly, we have an opportunity to get heritage Granstein apples from a 100-year tree orchard. Would love to propagate on our farm. Since I don't have rootstock to graft, I was thinking of using Stefan Subkowiak's method of burying the apples. Any idea? Thanks, JB. All right, so we're going to knock this question out step by step. Thank you so much, first of all, for the kind words. I really appreciate them. Sometimes doing this YouTube channel, you just get frustrated. Yeah, it's just frustrating sometimes because it seems like the videos that you put the most effort in seem to not take off, and then the ones that you just kind of threw together real quick seem to just blow up. So yeah, understanding the algorithm, and it's not you guys by any means, it's the understanding the YouTube algorithm and the fact that it changes every few months. So as soon as you get used to something, it just kind of changes on you, and then you have to readapt. Growing food is much easier. So first question, what are your thoughts about bees under home power electric wires? I don't know much about it, but just on the face of it, I would say it's probably not a good idea. And I think it probably messes with their navigation and communication a little bit. I know for sure that the bees that I have absolutely hate the Bluetooth microphone that I use. They also hate the cell phone. I know it's not the same electrical radiation that's coming from the cell phone as it is from the power lines. But I would probably not put them directly underneath it if you have the chance. If that's the only spot that they can go, then they're just gonna have to be tough bees. But if you have another option that's full sun in a different location, then I would go with that route, just to be on the safe side. Your next question is Southwest Oregon, half acre. So the reason your trees might be stunted, they might be encountering a compaction layer that's deeper in the soil than you might know about. Or it's just like with trees, it tends to be like no growth, very little growth, very little growth, and then all of a sudden they just blow up. So it might be the roots struggling to get through to the compaction layer, or there might be a surface layer compaction that isn't allowing the water to penetrate into the soil and get to the roots. Another option is that these soil microbes in your area where you've mulched and cardboarded and stuff like that just haven't started taking off yet. So I know it's frustrating. One thing else you could do is maybe try to prune. That could stimulate growth as well. My dad over at Permapasture's farm has a lot of content over on pruning, as well as Stefan Sokoviak, so maybe try those guys out. But that seems to be the most likely cause right now, is either compaction layer or maybe just introduce pruning to the scenario. And then as far as your old worm leachate, so like the worm casting juice, that is only beneficial if you use it pretty immediately. Like this stuff doesn't really have much of a shelf life, which all, you know, organic foods and supplements and stuff like that doesn't have much of a shelf life, unless you're talking about specific apples and stuff. But things should rot and things should go bad, and that's exactly what's happening with your worm composting or your worm casting leachate, or your worm juice for short. And whenever you use so one good thing about worms is that whatever they touch and whatever they eat and digest and poop out is beneficial. All of it's beneficial. It's like they got the Midas touch. Everything they everything they touch turns to gold. Everything they touch, it turns into beneficial bacteria. The downside is that, or the benefit is that that's a very aerobic environment. The downside is whenever you let it sit in a plastic container, even if it's vented, there's no oxygen being introduced to the actual liquid itself. So everything is gonna go anaerobic and starts producing molds and fungus, or molds and mildews and stuff like that. So yeah, it starts off aerobic and then will go anaerobic if you leave it sitting in a plastic container for too long. Molds and mildews are examples of anaerobic fungi, basically. So yeah, it's probably not good to use right now, and it's probably past the point of salvaging. What you could do is use it to water a hot compost pile if you wanted to. Also, your Granstein apples. I did a little bit of research on this question because it sounded familiar and I wasn't sure why, but apparently they were some of the original grafting rootstock for apples. So they should do pretty doggone well. They changed them because then they started developing, you know, better cultivars, better varieties for rootstock, but they should work pretty well. So what you could do is take cuttings of them, root those, and then plant those as trees. That's one example you could do. The downside with planting apple seeds is that there's like, I forget the chances, but it's like somewhere in the ballpark of like 1 in 20,000 chance that it's going to be like an edible, likable apple. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't necessarily go the route of burying the apple, but I would try to take cuttings from that tree and take as many as you can, and then just start rooting those. And then even if you wanted to, you could graft other apple varieties to that tree in the future, or just start producing your own doggone rootstock if you wanted to. So hopefully that answers all your questions. This one is from Chinese is Chesser. Hi William, I have a bunch of stinging nettle and thistle that has gone to seed. As I am still learning the 18-day compost method, first one turned out pretty good. I don't want to put them on the compost. My fetid swamp water drum, David the Good style, is already full with weeds, so my solution to deal with my thistle is to turn it into biochar. Do you have any other idea of dealing with these weeds in order to not further spread the seeds? So one thing you could do, biochar is an awesome idea. I mean, all the ideas that you listed there were awesome. One thing I will disagree with David the Good about is the fetid swamp water. I believe like a lot of those routes just kind of get you into the adding nutrients loop, like the anaerobic compost teas and stuff like that. It just gets you into the habit and the practice of adding, just constantly having to add nutrients versus getting the soil biology in place and then letting them take care of the nutrients forever, as long as you don't create compaction. But I mean, if it works for you and you're fine with it, then just continue doing it. I have no problems with it. It's just, I look for more permanent solutions versus the constantly have to create something and adding it to your garden and stuff. Unless it's like just really well-made compost in which I can make a very little bit and, you know, fertilize a whole bunch of stuff. But another thing you could do, now livestock won't eat fresh stinging nettle or anything like that, and for obvious reasons. It's like it's painful. If anybody who's ever dealt with stinging nettle, it's not fun. That's a very accurate name. So one thing you could do is cut it dry it, and then feed it to your livestock if you wanted to. If you dry it first and let it dry, let it get crumbly and stuff like that, and then feed it to your livestock, they're gonna go absolutely nuts for it, and it shouldn't have that same stinging effect. Also, it's super high in protein. It's higher in protein than alfalfa. So maybe check that out. I wouldn't use it as their sole source of food through winter, but it's a really good alternative. This one is from Stephanie Granstein 9457. I like that name. Hey William, I love the information you give. We purchased land that is in really bad shape. Lots of overgrown weeds and brush, but also trash. We recently discovered a large dirt pile that we thought was just that, dirt. It had a large hole behind it, so we pushed the pile down to fill in the hole. Well, it was not just dirt, but trash pile that was full of glass. So we built a large sifter to get the trash out of the dirt, and will then spread the dirt around the area. My question is, since this area will be extremely disturbed and the area around it already overgrown with weeds and thorns, should we put down cardboard over the area and prevent unwanted growth, or should we seed the area with a cover crop? I'm in middle Georgia and my area is sandy soil. Very good question. And in fact, in the back of these woods over here, when I start expanding this homestead, because right now only half of the property is fenced in, the other half is still overgrown new growth forest. The plan is to actually, there's actually a pile of trash back there as well, and there's a lot of glass, there's a lot of plastic involved and all that type of stuff, and it's going to be a nightmare to actually deal with. But in your scenario, what I would do is, once you get everything spread out, all the dirt moved that needs to be moved, once you get that squared away, what I would do is put down a cover crop and then scatter mulch over the top of it. So scatter mulch is basically, there's heavy mulching, which is what you usually do around your trees. And then there's scatter mulching, which I can still barely see the soil underneath the mulch. And it's usually done with hay or straw or something like that. So that's what I would try to do, is put down a cover crop and then scatter mulch over the top of it, and then either do that right before a rain event or water it in immediately afterwards. And that should help out quite a bit in combating. Also, make sure your cover crop is fast growing if possible. If not, it's fine. But that should do quite a bit in help combating the weed takeover that's going to happen right after that. So hopefully that helps. Alrighty, so that is all of the permaculture Q&A questions that I have for right now. That does not necessarily mean that I am caught up on the permaculture Q&A questions. There's still a lot to catch up on, and then there's also a lot of emails to catch up on as well. So hopefully that answers a lot of people's questions. Hopefully that helps. If you have a question that you'd like answered, then leave it down below in the comment section. By no means am I meaning like I'm overwhelmed by these questions. Keep them coming. Like, you're not going to provide too many questions, I promise you that. And if you have multiple questions, feel free to leave them in like a singular comment, like a lot of people just did in this video. So hopefully that helps. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, we'll see you.